Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about throwing knives. If you saw my recent video, I posted just a couple little shots I had throwing some of these different sets. I got back into throwing knives about a month or so ago. Now that it's fall, the weather is cooling off quite a bit. It's just a more attractive time during the year to throw knives to me, as well as hatchets, which is something somewhat new. We'll talk about a little bit in this video as well. At least new to me anyway. So first off, I got all this stuff from Sharper Edges. Sharper Edges website. They carry a lot of the cheaper brands. I mean, things that you guys probably recognize right away, like M-Tech. M-Tech is probably the most known, like, cheap brand, right? Elk Ridge, if you've ever seen those knives before. Tac Force, of course, Perfect Point, which are what all these throwing knives as well as the hatchets are. And they're all really cheap stuff. I have to use air quotes there because some people get upset when I say something's cheap, because when I'm saying something's cheap, I mean it literally does not cost a lot of money. But some people relate cheap to quality. Now, on a lot of the stuff, it is cheap quality too. Now, of course, cheap is always subjective when you're talking about quality. But when it comes to throwing knives, most of them out there are cheap. You do not see a whole lot of throwing knife sets for $100 or $500 or anything like that. Yes, there's always going to be custom-made stuff. I have a couple custom-made throwing knives as well, and they were in the $100 plus range each, and they're wonderful. They're very cool. However, I have just as much fun with super cheap stuff. Cheap in price and cheap in quality, because it works fine. We have just literally a cutout piece of metal that's sharpened. That's it. It does not have to be a fantastic premium blade steel. It does not have to have great fit and finish, because there is no fit and finish really. Except for this. This is a whole separate thing. I thought these were really, really fascinating. I'm actually going to make a separate video on this entirely. But these are the Perfect Point folding throwing knives. So stay tuned for that. That'll be a whole separate video. But yeah, with the exception of the foldable throwing knives, you don't have to worry about fit and finish. Because again, these are knives that are literally abused. You are throwing them at whatever target you choose. Mostly wood, you know, maybe you have a pallet, maybe you have like a nice big cutout, you know, tree stump or something, you throw it out. Maybe it's cardboard, who knows? In my case, it was an old dartboard. That makes a fantastic target. But that's what's so cool about this. When I talk about like a folding knife or even a fixed blade in a lot of cases, you know, I'm really looking for high quality. I'm looking for a blade steel that's going to really hold an edge for a long time. I'm looking for very good fit and finish, high quality materials, things like that, right? Throwing knives are just one of those exceptions when it comes to knives and quality and stuff. I know guys who EDC $700 knives, right? But they have a $10 throwing knife set. I know guys who EDC $10 knives and they have the same throwing knife set. So throwing knives as a hobby is extremely affordable, and plus it's just cool. You see it in movies, you know, you see it in entertainment and stuff, and it's just a cool thing. It's very, I mean, every teenage boy at some point and some teenage girls want to be a ninja. It's just kind of a cool thing, right? You want to throw knives and you want to, you know, swing a sword, and you know, it's just one of those things, right? We see it in movies. It's super exciting, obviously, in all these different action films and stuff, and you see someone throw a knife, and you're into knives as a hobby, it's extra cool, right? So you want to do it yourself. No shame in that. It's awesome. I love doing it. I've loved doing it ever since I was a kid. Now that I'm an adult, I still love doing it. But I've never progressed into wanting, you know, a $1,000 throwing knife. The cheap stuff works. That's the point here. However, they do work differently, and that's why I wanted to test these out and talk about it a little bit here. So just like every other type of knife, there's a million options. There's so many different styles of throwing knives. There's big, heavy ones. There's very small, light ones like these. All different shapes, double-edged, single-edged. I mean, you name it, right? But they do have different purposes. So, for example, like these ones here, okay? These are very small, they're very thin, and they're very lightweight. They all came very sharp. As far as like blade steels and stuff, most of these are 3 CR13 MOV. It's obviously a softer metal. You will come across having your tips bent. In fact, one of these bent right away when I threw it. These happen to have a very fine, thin point. So because of that, if it hits a rock or hits a knot in the wood or something, or when you're throwing them, obviously when you have multiple knives, they hit into each other. It happens all the time. You might have one stuck in your target, and you go to throw another one, and it bangs on this one. It's really common. So you're going to find, you know, the tips bend easily, especially on super thin ones like this, but they still work. And because it's a softer steel, you can bend it back as long as you're, you know, careful with it. It's less likely to snap because it's a soft steel. That's one of the advantages of having cheaper steels. One thing I've noticed though right away, and you'll see with this set, is when you have any kind of throwing knife that has a wrap on it, this has a very fine cord wrap, it will eventually fall off. Not because it just unties, but because they get banged around. And actually, let me show you in the case of this set, this one had a wrap on it. All right, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. I threw this knife, and it was sticking in the target, and then I threw another knife, and it went like this, and stuck in the target. It literally cut the thread. It cut on one point, sliced it perfectly, and it was just hanging there. And I didn't do anything with it. I didn't purposely take it off or put it, fix it up or anything like that. I just kept throwing it, and eventually it unraveled to where half of it was unraveled, and it was very distracting, so I just took it off. All right, that's something that's inevitable. So anything with any kind of wrap on it, don't expect that to last forever unless your target is over, grass. Like let's say you're in your backyard and you have a nice fluffy grass and you have a great target and you're only throwing one at a time and then taking it out of your target, then it'll probably last a long time. But I'm just saying, stuff like this, it's not like it's 550 cord or anything like that. It's just cheap nylon cord, and eventually it'll probably fall off. All right, a set like this, you don't have to worry about that because there is no cord. All right, there's a little 3-piece set here. And in this case, all three of these sets are double-edged. I do prefer double-edged, although I've used plenty single-edged knives. It doesn't, I mean, for throwing knives, I don't really see a huge advantage of having a double edge. If it's a traditional spear point, style blade, they stick just the same. I don't think they're any better or worse than if you have a single edge, like if you have some kind of a, buoy style, blade, a single edge. You're not gonna have any extreme points on that, not for throwing knives anyway. They're generally gonna be pretty straight. But like, for example, this one, it's a lot bigger, thicker, all right? So this is less likely to have like a bent tip on it, but it's not impossible. In fact, let's check out these tips. After lots of use on these tips are definitely blunted a little bit. They're not as pointy as they were when they were brand new. You can see chips taken out of the sides. That's the other thing too, is these have sharp edges, but the edges almost never touch the target. All right, they're not sticking into the target sideways. Okay, so when I'm throwing these, the point's sticking in. This is the business end. That's it. This whole thing sharpened, but it's not like it's gonna stick into the target very easily anyway, sideways. You'd have to have a lot of force for it to stick sideways like that. You're really just worried about the tip here. So in fact, like as far as handling these, a lot of times, I much prefer holding the blade than holding the handle. And that has to do with distance and rotations and all that kind of stuff. You can get pretty technical with this. I'm an amateur. I'm an amateur knife thrower. I've always thrown knives. I've read some books. I've watched some movies, but I'm not a professional. I'm not here to teach people how to throw knives, although I do have videos from years ago showing how to throw knives, and a lot of people, it helped them out, which is fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. But I'm not like amazing at it. I could throw knives sometimes. Sometimes I'll have a bad day if I'm throwing knives. Nothing sticks. They're all bouncing off left and right, like I don't know what I'm doing. And other times I look like a ninja. Just kind of depends on the day. You know what I mean? A little bit of luck there. But if you know the mechanics of it, if you are consistent, it's like any sport. If you're a pitcher in baseball, you pitch a ball, you pitch a ball again. If you pitch a ball 5 times, the likeliness of you throwing it exactly the same way every single time is not very high unless you practice a lot. You have to be good at it. It's like bowling. Anyone can throw a strike. But can you throw a strike 9 out of 10 times? That's what makes you a professional bowler. Anyone could blindly throw a knife and have a chance that it actually sticks like it's supposed to. But can you do it 9 out of 10 times? That's the difference between someone just not knowing what they're doing and a professional, right? It's consistency that goes across the board. But anyway, I'm kind of veering off the subject here. The point I was trying to get to is that if you're worried about cutting yourself, because these do have sharp edges, like when I'm holding these, I'm holding them gingerly. I'm not squeezing tight or anything, and I'm not sliding them in and out of my hand, but they have very thin, sharp edges. So I'm holding them by their edges, and I'm throwing them by their blades like this. If you're concerned about cutting yourself, you can dull these. You can dull the edge all the way down. I would leave probably at least 1/3 of the tip sharp. All right, because you want them to actually stick very well. But remember, this sharp edge here and the sharp edge here, it has no business doing anything. I'm not taking this out to cut open my mail. It's not a pocket knife. It's not a fixed blade for me. It's technically a fixed blade, yes, but these are dedicated throwing knives, so I don't need them to be sharp way down here. They happen to be sharp when they come new. But I mean, it's flashy because it's shiny, but you can dull these edges. And if you want it to look flashy, you can polish up the edge. You can actually have it dulled, but polish the face of it so it shines, you know, it glistens and stuff, but it's not actually sharp. I mean, that's what you see in Hollywood movies. If you actually look at any knife scene and pause the screen, you'll notice that they're blunted tips and they're very shiny edges, but you can see that they're rounded, all right? So, yeah. So getting back to the advantages and disadvantages of some of these. The small light ones, these are fantastic because there's a bunch of them. So you get a lot of shots before you have to go pull them out of the target. So I like the bigger sets like this 9-piece set. But this does has its limitations. And what I found with these is that I can only do a single rotation from about 6 feet away with any kind of consistency. Because they're so small and lightweight, and I mean one rotation, meaning that I'm holding the blade, I'm throwing it, and when I let go, it's literally rotating one time, okay, before it hits the target. The further away you get from the target, the more it spins and rotates, right? So having a 2 full rotation throw, you might be 10 feet away from the target. Being so small and lightweight, even if you're physically throwing hard, it's hard to get that proper, you know, rotation and the inertia you really need because there's not a lot of mass there. Kind of, I mean, maybe I'm not explaining this properly, but it's just harder to throw something small and light further away than something that's bigger and heavy. So these I can stand 10 or 15, well, about 10 or 12 feet away from the target, and I can still get this to rotate twice and stick. Not as successful as if I was 6 feet away from the target and have a single rotation. I could do that 9 out of 10 times. In some cases, I could throw 30 or 40 in a row, and they will all stick fine. But once I get further away, it gets, you know, tremendously more difficult in keeping my wrist straight and keeping a very consistent throw. But you need more mass. You need a heavier, bigger knife to be able to successfully do that from a larger distance from your target. So, I mean, as far as like a beginner's, if you've never thrown knives before at all, I would actually recommend something like this. A bigger set, so you get a lot more throws before you have to take it out. Because if you buy one throwing knife, you step back from target, you throw it, okay, it bounces off, you go pick it up, you walk back, you throw it, oh, it bounces off again, because you're new, you have to get the hang of things. But if you have 9 of them in your hand ready to go, you throw it, it bounces, you throw it, you don't have to pick them up and retrieve them as frequently. So not only do you not get bored quicker, but you have a better chance of actually getting one to stick, in between sets. But also you're generally going to be closer. You're not going to start throwing knives from 25 feet away. You know what I mean? So it's not a bad thing having them to be small and light and stuff, but definitely consider that you're going to be close to the target to have any kind of success with something that's smaller and lighter like this. All right. When I first started throwing these, I actually liked this set quite a bit, just because they're kind of thicker and they're meatier. And I actually had like my first set with these, they all were within like 3 inches. It was an amazing set. It was the best set I've thrown since throwing all these knives, but it was one and done. After that, I actually started disliking these the most, mostly because they weren't really sharp out of the box. I mean, the sides, again, they don't have to be sharp. These happen to be really sharp out of the box. These were really sharp out of the box. These are not sharp, but also the tips aren't sharp either. So they're just more rounded right out of the gate. So they stuck less. I needed to physically throw them harder to get them to stick. Also, I mean, I grabbed these just because they're different styles. I'm not too fond of the different colors and stuff. I mean, I like that it's all consistent. I mean, I happen to think those are cool looking, and those are cool looking, and these look cheap to me. But, I mean, to each their own. Everyone has a different opinion on stuff like that. But you can see, I mean, there's a couple different colors here in the 6-piece set. So this was a black handle with a red blade, which is kind of strange too, because there's 3 that have black handles in colors. So this was black on black. That was red on black. This is green on black, yellow on black. But then these don't have black wraps. They actually have colored wraps. So you have blue and blue and then gold and gold. It's just kind of random. I mean, but they worked. They just weren't as good to me as, both of these sets here. Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to throwing knives and stuff. It was a ton of fun, I have to say. I mean, I get joy out of different knives for different reasons, and some people don't understand this sometimes. And I'll use a knife that's $400, and I'll say, wow, this is an amazing knife, it's great, okay. And the next week I'll test a knife out that's $25, and sometimes I like the $25 knife more. And it's not necessarily because it's better, because usually it's not. Usually it's a piece of crap in comparison to the $400 knife. However, it still serves its own purpose, whether it's innovative or different, or maybe it's just extra comfortable to me. So I still value all knives across the board. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be this, crazy new design or anything like that. Sometimes what works just works. But I do treat each individual knife or cutting tool as an individual tool, and I judge it by itself. I don't try to compare knives to other knives, because if I take a $20 knife, it'll always be a piece of junk compared to many of the knives that I've had before that were just better quality. They had better materials. They just performed better. Some knives can literally get sharper than cheap knives because of their steels, because of their properties. But again, coming back to the throwing knife, scene, it's all the same. They're all cheap. It works fine. They all work fine. As long as, you're having fun doing it, that's the whole point. But you can have a ton of fun for 25 bucks. And I talk to people, all the time. They get into knives and they watch all these, YouTube videos and they read about them on the internet. And they hit the ground running. Their first knife is like a $200 knife, and then their second knife is a $200 knife, and all of a sudden they got like an $8,000 collection of really high-end folders, and they get bored. And that's okay. That happens all the time. I talk to a lot of people who just get bored. Some people collect knives for a week. Some people have been collecting knives for 15 years, and they're like, you know what? One day, it's just boring. They just don't care anymore. Why am I spending all this money on knives? It's a constant chase for the next thing. You know what I mean? I guess that could be said about any hobby. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because this is cheap. It's okay to spend 20 bucks on a knife set like this, throw them for an hour, and just not care ever again. You're only out 25 bucks. You know what I mean? That's what I like about throwing knives. And some people just might find that they're just not good at it. And that's very discouraging. Just like anything else. If you go bowling and you suck, and then you try to practice, but you keep sucking and you never get better, then you just don't want to bowl anymore. That's just common. No one wants to not enjoy something they're doing. And, obviously people have different levels of how much they actually enjoy something. So you might think you'll love knife throwing and then you hate it. But who knows? Maybe you never really gave much thought and you give it a go and then you love it and it's something you do every weekend. I have to say, in the last probably, I want to say at least 3 or 4 years, axe throwing and hatchet throwing has been super popular. And you see these places pop up all the time. Sometimes they're at bars. I see them, here in the Pocono area in Pennsylvania. A lot of times if you go to like a pumpkin patch or like an apple orchard or something, they'll have these all the time now. There'll be like a little vendor there, or they'll have a spot where people throw axes for fun. It's really gaining popularity across the board. The last time I went to the county fair, they never had one before, but this year, or this previous visit, they had a whole little booth for axe throwing, just because it's kind of fun and new. So although I've never done axe throwing, believe it or not, in full-size axes, I have thrown hatchets a lot over the years. It's a totally different experience. Let me move this stuff out of the way for a second so I can show you these hatchets. And again, these are cheap ones. You don't have to do this with a very expensive custom hatchet. But this is a two-piece. Like I said, this is the most expensive thing on the table at like 40 bucks. All right, and I know a lot of you guys are dropping, $100 on a knife a week sometimes, or more. So $40 for 2 hatchets is not a bad gig here. But you can see they're very simple designs here. Now, as far as what I was doing, I wasn't actually using the blade of the hatchet, to stick. I was using the spike. Again, because of my target being an old dartboard and stuff, the hard wood of the tree itself was too hard for this to penetrate or actually stick. And it was if I used the blade portion on the dartboard, it was gonna mess it up. It was gonna spread the actual cardboard of it too much, and I wouldn't be able to use the other throwing knives very nicely. In other words, it would ruin it. So I basically just used the spike portion, which made a much smaller hole that I was able to kind of mush back when I was done. So I would literally throw them backwards. Okay, so it line up, rotate it again, just one full rotation, and then the spike, obviously if you time it properly, it would hit the target. And you can see that in my previous video that I posted. And it's a ton of fun. It is a lot of fun. Throwing hatchets are different because it's physically a bigger mass. They're heavier. It takes more strength. And when they hit, they thwack. It's a big smack noise. And I don't know, it's kind of extra exciting, I guess. Maybe because it's a little newer to me. But here's a different set. And I don't think there's any huge disadvantages over one of these with another. It's kind of just how you like the looks of them. Again, because I was using the spike portion of the back, it doesn't really matter as far as the handle design or anything like that at all. The one thing I will say though is that because these are cheaper, they do have like almost unfinished edges. They're not sharp, but they're certainly not like extra smooth or comfortable. So these edges, these shoulders, if you really want to get serious about this and throw them all the time, I'd recommend hitting this with some sandpaper. Even better if you happen to have a grinder or something, a grinding wheel, to just knock off this edge completely. Just hit it here and then the other side, just around the whole handle portion here, so when you're actually throwing these guys, they're nice and comfortable. And if you want to, you can go an extra mile and use some kind of a wrap or something, like a tennis racket wrap or whatever you want for handles, to really make it very comfortable if you're going to be throwing them all the time. For me, it didn't really matter. You know, I probably threw these for maybe 45 minutes or something total in one session, and I didn't have any like hot spots. It wasn't irritating my hands or anything. But I'm just saying, for long-term purposes, that's what I would probably do with these to make sure that they're more comfortable. So here's a single one. Again, these things are like $8, you know, $8 to $10. This one happens to have the American flag on it. This is also more squared off. So we have a square or a straight edge as opposed to a curved blade there. All right, here's another style. All right, this is actually the same one as this, but this is a single one instead of the double. And the last one here is a 2-pack. It's actually funny, I cut my finger opening I have all these blades here, and I got my finger on the button. If you saw me in that one button, I was struggling. I must have rubbed the side. Let's cut the outside of my finger there. Anyway, just thinking like, wow, my finger's burning. What's going on with that? Then these have the little fire motif on it, which is kind of cool too. This definitely reminds me of a fireman type axe or something. But you guys get the point here. I mean, these are just super cheap options for hatchets as well as throwing knives. I think they're awesome. Perfect Point as a brand, these are all Perfect Point brand. They're super cheap, they work fine, you know what I mean? They're very accessible. Like I said, you can find them directly on the website. The actual makers owning all these brands is Sharper Edges, but they have a lot of different dealers out there. You know, Amazon, I'm sure they sell them all over Amazon. But it's a really fun hobby. If you guys never got into throwing knives or throwing hatchets, it's worth a try. Throwing hatchets are definitely harder. All right, it's not only harder, but you're also more limited with your targets. If you've never done it before, I would highly recommend starting with knife sets like this. Get a big old 6-piece, a 9-piece, 12-piece. Sometimes there's a couple of them I think that are huge, like 24 pieces. Literally 24 different knives, so you could stand there with a whole handful of them and one at a time without having to walk back and forth. Because again, people get discouraged when they start getting tired and you start feeling that like the strain on your arm, because again, you're going to be using muscles you probably don't normally use if you're throwing a knife all day like this. It doesn't take long. After about an hour, you're find your shoulders a little sore, you know, unless you play darts all the time, then you're used to, you know, kind of throwing like that. But I would definitely start with the throwing knives. If it's something you like, you know, progress, maybe try some bigger ones as well. And then eventually, if you want to, you know, switch over and try the hatchets, that's cool too. And if you get really good at it, obviously you can buy more expensive. It's different here because throwing knives are almost always cheap. Hatchets are different. Throwing hatchets like this, these are cheap Chinese-made throwing hatchets. They're all going to be affordable. But hatchets in general can get expensive. You know, if you start throwing some Grandford's Brook or something like that, that's a different ballpark there. That's going to cost a little bit of extra money. But that's totally unnecessary because you're not looking for the performance in the blades, because the cheapest spike is still a spike. It doesn't matter if this is S35VN or pot metal, okay? It's a sharp piece of metal that sticks into whatever you're throwing it at. That's it. That's the mechanics of a throwing knife or throwing hatchet in this case. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to have good edge retention. They just have to stay pointy. And it would take a lot to get them to no longer be pointy. Also keep in mind too, like I was taking a risk. I happened to put my target at the end of a driveway. So some of them bounced back, and they would hit into the blacktop, and obviously, you know, mess up the tips a little bit. I think one of these is bent. Take a look at that. I'm sure I could find it here somewhere. Not that you can't imagine what a bent tip looks like, but like this one's, no, one of them's really bent. There it is. I could feel it dragging. All right, yeah, this guy got pretty jacked up because it came back, and you can see that's a little hook now. But even though that's massively hooked over to the side, it still sticks fine because we still have an acute point here. All right, so still, as it's traveling forward into the target, there's enough force where it still goes right into the target. It doesn't matter that it's bent over like that. All right, but I'll probably actually, since I'm talking about it, I'll get a little hammer, I'll go outside, do it on a little stump of wood, and just straighten that out a little bit. But anyway, it's super fun. It's really fun, and the whole point here is just to say you don't have to spend an arm and a leg on this stuff. It is probably one of the cheaper ways as far as getting into knives and really enjoying them. So if you never gave it a shot, it's worth giving it a shot. It's just kind of cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, I'll do a separate video on this set. I'll give you a little sneak peek here because these things are wicked cool. They are folding throwers, and I love them. I think it's just cool. You know me, I like innovation, and these are very innovative. Is it necessary? 100% not. I don't know why someone came up with that idea, but I still like it. So anyway, that's it. Hope you guys have an awesome day. Let me know down in the comment section if you ever gave knife throwing a shot, and if it's something you do regularly. For me, like I said in the other video, maybe once or twice a year, I'll get into the mode, I'll do it for a couple hours, and then I'm good. You know, I put all the stuff away and I wait till next year. You know, or if I'm showing someone else or talking about it, maybe I'll break them out. You know, I did that with Vinny once. We happened to be talking about throwing knives, and I did a video years ago with Vinny. Maybe we should do another one in the future if he's up for it. But yeah, just happened to mention it, and he's like, oh, I'd love to give that a shot. And I took out all my throwing knives, and same deal. I set up a dartboard and showed him how to throw it, and it turned out to be pretty good. So you just never know. Anyway, that's it. Hope you guys have an awesome day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow with a brand new video. Take care.